The sun beat down relentlessly on the parched Texas landscape, a relentless furnace that seemed to bake the very soul out of everything it touched. For 16-year-old Ilara, the heat was just another layer of the suffocating world she inhabited, a world confined largely to the musty, splintered walls of a barn. Her stepfather, Jedediah Thorne, was a man carved from granite and bitterness, his voice a perpetual growl, his eyes like chips of ice. Since her mother's passing 2 years prior, a slow, agonizing surrender to consumption that had left Ilara utterly alone, Jedediah's cruelty had escalated. Every spilled bucket, every misplaced tool, every perceived act of defiance, no matter how small, earned her a sentence in the barn. Today's offense, a single cracked egg. Ilara had been careful, her hands calloused but nimble, yet one clumsy moment had sent the fragile shell against the rim of the bowl. The sharp crack had echoed in the oppressive silence of the kitchen, drawing Jedediah's immediate, thunderous presence. "Worthless girl, can't even manage a simple task," he had roared, his face purpling, his heavy hand already grabbing her arm. He'd dragged her out past the dusty yard towards the barn, its gaping maw a familiar symbol of her punishment. The iron bolt clanged shut, a sound that always reverberated in her chest, sealing her fate once again. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of hay, horse manure, and her own quiet desperation. A single, grimy window high up offered a sliver of the outside world, a teasing glimpse of freedom she rarely tasted. Her stomach growled, a hollow ache that was a constant companion. She traced patterns in the dust on the floor, her mind wandering to memories of her mother's soft laughter, her gentle touch. Those memories were fading, like old photographs left too long in the sun, replaced by the stark, brutal reality of her daily existence. She longed for escape, a whisper of hope in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the West. But where could a girl like her go? She had no money, no connections, and a profound fear of the unknown beyond Jedediah's property line. Each day was a battle for survival, a testament to a spirit that, despite everything, refused to be entirely crushed. She knew deep down that she couldn't endure this much longer. The question wasn't if she would break, but when. She closed her eyes, trying to conjure the image of a different life, one where laughter was real and the sun didn't feel like a personal enemy. Miles away, in the small, bustling town of Redemption's End, Sarah Miller ran her late husband's general store with a quiet determination that belied her slender frame. A widow for 3 years, she had 2 young children, 8-year-old Lily and 5-year-old Thomas, whose bright eyes were her constant motivation. Life was hard, demanding, but Sarah faced each day with a strength forged in loss and love. She was respected in town, known for her fair dealings and kind heart, a beacon of stability in a world often defined by its harshness. One sweltering afternoon, a traveling peddler named Silas Vance stopped at her store. He was a wizened old man with keen eyes that missed little. As he haggled over prices, he spoke of his travels through the outlying ranches. "There's talk," he muttered, leaning in conspiratorially, "about Jedediah Thorne's place. Poor Ilara, that girl. Her mother, God rest her soul, was a sweet woman. But that Jedediah, he's a devil, I tell you. Locks her in that barn for days on end. Barely feeds her. Saw her once, thin as a rail, eyes like a haunted deer." Sarah's heart clenched. She knew Jedediah by reputation, a harsh, unsociable man who rarely came to town. The stories were vague, whispers really, but Silas's words painted a vivid, horrifying picture. She thought of Lily and Thomas, safe and loved, and a fierce maternal instinct flared within her. No child deserved such cruelty. "Are you certain, Silas?" she asked, her voice tight. "As certain as the sun rises, ma'am," he affirmed, shaking his head. "Someone ought to do something." That night, after Lily and Thomas were tucked into bed, Sarah sat by the window, the faint strains of a fiddle from the saloon drifting through the night air. The peddler's words haunted her. She pictured Ilara, a girl she'd only seen once or twice from a distance, suffering alone. What could she do? As a widow with children, her own life was precarious, but inaction felt like a greater sin. She remembered her late husband, John, a man who had always stood up for what was right. He would never have ignored such a plea. A plan, daring and fraught with risk, began to form in her mind. It was a long shot, but she couldn't simply sit by and do nothing. The image of Ilara's haunted eyes, as described by Silas, spurred her forward. She knew she had to try. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Sarah made her preparations. She packed a satchel with food, water, a warm blanket, and a small, well-oiled Colt revolver that John had taught her to use just in case. She left a note for her trusted neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, explaining she was going to visit a sick relative and asking her to look after the children. Lily and Thomas were still asleep, blissfully unaware of their mother's perilous mission. Sarah kissed their foreheads, a silent promise to return, and then, with a prayer on her lips, she mounted her sturdy mare, Buttercup, and set off towards Jedediah Thorne's remote ranch. The journey was long and arduous. The Texas landscape stretched out endlessly, a vast canvas of scrub brush, cacti, and red dust. The sun climbed higher, relentless and unforgiving, baking the air and making the dust rise with every hoofbeat. Sarah rode for hours, her determination fueled by a potent mix of fear and resolve. She replayed Silas's words in her mind, imagining Ilara's plight, and that image hardened her resolve. She passed by other ranches, isolated homesteads, but never dared to stop, her mission too urgent and clandestine to risk exposure. As afternoon wore on, the outline of Jedediah's ranch finally appeared on the horizon. A small, dilapidated farmhouse, a sagging barn, and a few outbuildings, all looking as desolate as the landscape around them. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was it. The air crackled with a tension that was almost palpable. She dismounted a safe distance away, tying Buttercup to a low mesquite tree, and proceeded on foot, moving cautiously through the tall, dry grass. She could see no sign of Jedediah. The house appeared quiet, almost abandoned. Her gaze fell on the barn, its large wooden door clearly visible, and her breath hitched. She had to be careful, strategic. A misstep could mean disaster not just for her, but for Ilara. This wasn't just an act of kindness, it was an act of rebellion against a brutal system. Sarah approached the barn with bated breath, every nerve on edge. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the chirping of cicadas and the distant caw of a crow. She peered through a gap in the weathered wood, her eyes adjusting to the dim light inside. There, huddled in a corner, almost invisible amidst the shadows and hay, was Ilara. She was painfully thin, her clothes ragged, her face smudged with dirt and tears. Her eyes, when she looked up at the sound of Sarah's approach, were wide with a mixture of terror and utter hopelessness. "Ilara?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "My name is Sarah Miller. I'm here to help you." Ilara stared, uncomprehending, as if Sarah were a phantom. Hope was a concept so alien to her that she couldn't grasp it. But Sarah's voice was kind, gentle, a stark contrast to Jedediah's harsh commands. Sarah fumbled with the heavy iron bolt on the barn door, her fingers surprisingly strong. With a creak and a groan it slid open. The sudden rush of sunlight startled Ilara, making her flinch. "Come on, child," Sarah urged, extending a hand. "We don't have much time." Ilara hesitated, fear warring with a desperate, buried flicker of hope. She looked at the open door, then at Sarah's outstretched hand. It was a small hand, but firm. Slowly, she reached out and grasped it. Sarah pulled her gently, and Ilara, unsteady on her feet, stumbled out into the blinding sunlight. She blinked, her eyes unused to the brightness, and looked around with a wild, disoriented gaze. "We need to go now," Sarah whispered, leading her quickly towards Buttercup. "Can you ride?" Ilara nodded, her voice a dry rasp when she tried to speak. Sarah helped her onto the mare, then mounted behind her, holding her tightly. They rode away from the ranch. leaving behind the dust and the despair, a silent escape under the vast, watchful eye of the Texas sky. Ilara leaned against Sarah, the warmth of another human body, a comfort she hadn't felt in years. As they rode, Ilara risked a glance back at the barn, then forward at the endless horizon, a hesitant, fragile sense of liberation dawning within her. The journey back to Redemption's End was slower, as Ilara was weak and Sarah had to be mindful of her. Sarah spoke softly, reassuringly, telling Ilara about her store, her children, and the peaceful life she hoped Ilara could find there. Ilara listened, her mind slowly processing the reality of her escape. When they finally rode into town, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Sarah took Ilara directly to her small, cozy home behind the general store. Lily and Thomas, who had been anxiously awaiting their mother's return, burst out the door at the sound of hooves. Their joyful cries turned to curious whispers when they saw Ilara, pale and timid, clinging to Sarah's side. "Children, this is Ilara," Sarah introduced gently. "She'll be staying with us for a while." Lily, ever the more outgoing, offered a tentative smile. Thomas, shy but observant, simply stared. Ilara felt a blush creep up her neck, unaccustomed to such direct attention, especially from children. Sarah led her inside, bathed her, and gave her a clean, simple dress, one of Lily's outgrown ones, but it felt like silk against Ilara's skin. For the first time in years, Ilara ate a proper meal, savoring every bite of the warm stew and fresh bread. She watched Sarah interact with her children, their laughter, their easy affection, a sight so foreign and beautiful it brought tears to her eyes. That night, tucked into a soft bed, a real bed, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Ilara wept silent tears of relief and gratitude. She was safe. She was warm. She was not alone. The nightmares of the barn still flickered at the edges of her sleep, but the soft glow of the oil lamp and the sounds of a peaceful, loving home kept them at bay. This was more than she had ever dared to dream of, a fragile new beginning in a world that had almost broken her. She felt a profound debt to Sarah, a woman who had risked everything for a stranger. Days turned into weeks, and Ilara slowly began to heal, both physically and emotionally. The nourishment Sarah provided, combined with the safety and kindness, brought a healthy glow back to her cheeks. She was still quiet, reserved, but a faint smile occasionally touched her lips, especially when she was with Lily and Thomas. She helped Sarah in the store, sweeping floors, stocking shelves, and learning to count change, her nimble fingers proving a valuable asset. The work was honest, and the feeling of contributing, of being useful, was a balm to her wounded spirit. Lily and Thomas, initially curious, quickly grew fond of Ilara. Lily loved to show her drawings, and Ilara, with a hidden artistic talent, would add small, intricate details to them. Thomas, who rarely spoke, would bring Ilara his toy soldiers, and she would listen patiently as he narrated imaginary battles. Their innocent affections slowly chipped away at the walls Ilara had built around her heart. Sarah watched Ilara bloom with a quiet satisfaction. She saw the girl's intelligence, her resilience, her gentle nature, and felt a deep connection to her. Ilara, in turn, began to see Sarah not just as her rescuer, but as a mother figure, a source of unwavering strength and comfort. The bond between them deepened, unspoken, but profoundly felt. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the stars ignite the vast desert sky, Ilara finally spoke of her past. In a soft, hesitant voice, she recounted the years of Jedediah's cruelty, the loneliness, the constant fear. Sarah listened, her hand resting on Ilara's, a silent comfort. "You're safe now, Ilara," she said, her voice firm. "You're family." Ilara looked at her, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, a profound sense of belonging finally settling in her heart. She knew Jedediah was still out there, a shadow in her memory. But here, with Sarah and the children, she felt a strength she never knew she possessed. The familiar, comforting scent of fresh-baked bread and cured ham filled the general store, a stark contrast to the sudden, jarring noise of the front door swinging open with a violent bang. Ilara, in the middle of stacking heavy flour sacks, froze, her hands still on the coarse burlap. A cold, familiar dread, like a winter chill in the height of summer, seized her. Standing in the doorway, a hulking silhouette against the sun-drenched street, was Jedediah Thorne. He was bigger, rougher than she remembered. His once grizzled beard was now a wild, tangled mess, and his eyes, narrowed to malevolent slits, were chips of pure malice. His presence was a suffocating menace, filling the small, cozy space with the odor of stale sweat and old whiskey. He looked past Sarah, past the carefully arranged goods, and fixed his gaze directly on Ilara. "There you are, you ungrateful wretch," he snarled, his voice a low, gravelly growl that sent shivers down Ilara's spine. "Thought you could just run off, did you? Leave your chores and your family to rot?" Ilara's breath caught in her throat. All the old fears, the terror of the barn, the sting of his brutal words surged back, threatening to swallow her whole. She instinctively recoiled, stumbling backwards, her hand clutching at the wooden shelving for support. Sarah, who had been in the back room counting the day's receipts, heard the commotion. She emerged from behind the beaded curtain, her face hardening as she recognized the man from Silas's stories. She saw Ilara's terror, and a fierce, protective fire ignited in her eyes. Without a moment's hesitation, she stepped forward, placing herself squarely between Ilara and the menacing figure. "Jedediah Thorne," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her hands. She was a small woman, but her presence was immense. "She is not going anywhere with you." Jedediah scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. He took a heavy step forward, his boot heel thudding on the wooden floorboards. "She's my ward, my property. Her mother put me in charge of her. I'll do with her as I please." His eyes, fixed on Ilara, held a promise of dark retribution. "Get out of my way, woman. This is none of your business." "It became my business the moment you mistreated a child in my county," Sarah declared. Her chin held high, defiance etched into every line of her face. "She is under my protection now, and I will not let you harm her." The sharp, angry exchange drew the attention of Lily and Thomas, who had been playing quietly in the back. Their heads peeked around the curtain, their eyes wide with fear and confusion as they took in the scene. Their mother, a fierce lioness, standing against a man whose face was twisted with fury. Seeing the children, Jedediah paused. His gaze swept over them, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, perhaps a hint of the man he might have been, long buried under layers of cruelty. Just then, the distant sound of a horse's hooves and the sight of Sheriff Thompson ambling down the street, his familiar figure in the distance, further curtailed Jedediah's immediate aggression. He knew he couldn't cause a scene, not in front of witnesses and a lawman. His anger, however, was far from gone. "This isn't over, Sarah Miller," he snarled, his voice low and full of venom. "You haven't seen the last of me. You can't hide her forever." With a final menacing glare at Ilara, a glare that promised a day of reckoning, he spun on his heel and stormed out of the store, the bang of the door on his way out a final exclamation point on his threat. A chilling silence settled in his wake. Ilara, her legs giving out from under her, collapsed onto a flour sack, trembling uncontrollably. The past, which she had so carefully buried, had not just reappeared. It had tried to consume her once more. Sarah rushed to her side, wrapping her arms around the girl, her hands stroking Ilara's hair. "He's gone, Ilara. He's gone. You're safe." The words were simple, but they were the only balm that could soothe the deep-seated terror that still gripped her. The incident with Jedediah Thorne left a deep, lingering scar. Ilara was shaken to her core, but the fear was different now. It was no longer a paralyzing dread, but a cold fuel that ignited a fierce resolve. She would not go back. She had tasted freedom, kindness, and love, and she would fight to protect it. Sarah, however, understood the very real danger that Jedediah represented. His threat wasn't an empty one. He was a man who lived by his own brutal rules, and he saw Ilara not as a person, but as a possession that had been stolen. Realizing she couldn't face this threat alone, Sarah sought help from the one person she knew she could trust, Ben Carter. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a face weathered by the sun and a gentle demeanor that belied his strength. Ben was a widower himself, raising 2 grown sons on his sprawling ranch just outside of town. He had become a familiar and welcome presence at Sarah's store, and a quiet admiration had been growing between them for months. Sarah recounted Jedediah's visit, her voice laced with worry and a rare touch of fear. Ben listened intently, his expression grim as he leaned against the counter, his large hands clasped together. "He's a dangerous man, Sarah," he acknowledged, his voice low and serious. "He operates outside the law, and he doesn't take well to being crossed." He paused, his gaze meeting hers, a silent promise in his dark eyes. "But he won't lay a hand on Ilara or you, not while I'm around, not on my watch." His promise wasn't just words. Ben, along with a few other respected townsfolk who had witnessed the incident, spoke to Sheriff Thompson. They explained Jedediah's history of cruelty and the threat he had made. The sheriff, a reasonable man, agreed to put out the word to Jedediah that any further harassment would result in immediate legal action. More than that, Ben began to frequent the store with a new purpose. He'd come in ostensibly for supplies, a sack of grain for his horses, a new lantern for his barn, but his visits were always timed to keep a watchful eye on Sarah and Ilara. He'd sit on a stool by the counter, chatting with customers, his presence a comforting shield. Ilara, initially shy, found herself relaxing in his company. She saw the way he treated Sarah with respect and kindness, and the gentle way he played with Lily and Thomas, bringing them small, intricately carved wooden toys he'd made himself. As Ben spent more time at the store, he saw Ilara's quiet resilience, her diligence in her work, and the tender way she cared for Sarah's children. He saw the transformative love Sarah had given her, and his respect for Sarah deepened into something more profound. Their conversations, once limited to business, grew into something more personal. They found themselves sharing stories of their late spouses, of the loneliness of raising children alone, and the small, quiet joys they found in their daily lives. The silent, unspoken connection between them grew stronger with each passing day. The tentative and fragile romance that had been budding between them now began to truly blossom, offering not just companionship, but the very real hope of a future free from fear for all of them. For Ilara, Ben's presence was a strong, protective aura that reminded her of the father she'd barely known, and she felt a sense of security she had not known since her mother's death. The seed of a new family, a true family, had been planted in the harsh soil of the Old West, nourished by shared struggles and the quiet promise of a love yet to come. Jedediah Thorne, a man whose pride was as vast as the Texas sky and whose cruelty was as endless, was not one to be deterred by a simple warning. His public humiliation in the general store had stung him deeply. His control had been challenged, and in his mind that demanded a far greater price. He returned to Redemption's End a few weeks later, this time not alone. He brought with him 2 rough-looking men, hired hands whose faces were as hard and unforgiving as his own. Their presence was meant to be a show of force, a clear message that Jedediah was a man who got what he wanted one way or another. They stormed into the general store in the late afternoon, their heavy boots making a thunderous sound on the floorboards. The sudden, violent interruption shattered the peaceful quiet of the store. "I've come for what's mine!" Jedediah roared, his voice echoing off the walls, his hand already reaching for the hilt of his pistol. He pointed a finger, thick and calloused, at Ilara, who stood behind Sarah, trembling but no longer broken. Fear was still there, but now it was laced with a new, defiant strength. Before Jedediah could take another step, Ben Carter, who had been forewarned by a scout from his ranch, stepped forward. He stood tall and unmoving, a bulwark of calm in the storm. The town, however, was no longer unaware. Word had spread like wildfire about Ilara's plight and Sarah's brave rescue. The community, always tight-knit and fiercely protective of its own, had rallied. Ben was not alone. The sheriff, along with a few other ranchers and merchants, had quietly taken their places throughout the store. The atmosphere crackled with tension, a coiled spring ready to snap. "She's not yours, Jedediah," Ben said, his voice calm but firm, holding Jedediah's gaze. "She's a free woman, and she's under the protection of this town. We will not let you take her." Jedediah's hired men bristled, hands hovering over their holsters, their eyes darting around the store, assessing the silent, armed resistance. The sheriff, however, stepped between them, his presence an official statement. "Jedediah, you have no legal claim on Ilara. Her mother's will stipulated her care, and you have clearly violated that trust. I am giving you one last chance. Leave now, or face the consequences of a town that has had enough." Enraged, Jedediah lost all sense of control. His face a mask of fury, he lunged for Ilara, but Ben was quicker. With a speed that belied his size, he intercepted Jedediah, blocking his path. A brief, fierce struggle ensued, men shouting, furniture crashing to the floor. Jedediah's hired thugs made a move, but the other townsmen, armed and ready, quickly drew their weapons, their movements synchronized and efficient. The hired men, seeing the odds against them, quickly backed down and were disarmed. Jedediah, overpowered and humiliated, was finally subdued, a look of shocked disbelief on his face as he was brought to his knees. The townsfolk watched, a collective sigh of relief sweeping through the store. Justice, in the rough-and-tumble way of the West, had been served. Jedediah and his men were arrested by the sheriff, their reign of terror finally over. Ilara, no longer shrinking from the conflict, looked at Sarah, then at Ben, a fierce sense of gratitude and belonging filling her heart. She was truly safe, truly free. With Jedediah gone and the threat finally removed, a palpable peace settled over redemption's end, a sense of a community that had stood together and won. This peace was most evident in Sarah's home. Ilara, now officially adopted by Sarah through the proper channels and with the sheriff's support, blossomed fully. The last vestiges of the haunted look in her eyes had vanished, replaced by a confident spark of life and joy. She became an indispensable part of the general store's operation, her laughter now mingling with those of Lily and Thomas as they helped with chores and played in the sunlit yard. She was a daughter, a sister, and a vital member of a loving family. She had faced darkness and emerged into the light, guided by the unwavering compassion of a widow and the steadfast support of a community. The bond between Sarah and Ben deepened into a profound and abiding love. Several months after Jedediah's final humiliating removal from town, Ben, with the blessing of his grown sons and the enthusiastic encouragement of Lily and Thomas, proposed to Sarah. She accepted, her heart full, knowing she had found not just a partner, but a true companion who shared her values and her love for family. Their wedding was a joyous affair, a celebration of resilience, love, and the strength of a community that had come together to protect its own. Ilara stood beside Sarah as her bridesmaid, a beautiful, confident young woman, her face glowing with happiness, a living testament to the transformative power of kindness. She had found her place, her family, and her home. She was no longer the frightened girl locked in a barn, but a cherished daughter, a beloved sister, and a vital member of a loving family. Life in the Old West remained challenging, but for Ilara, Sarah, Ben, Lily, and Thomas, they faced it together, a united family. Their story became a quiet legend in redemption's end, a reminder that even in the harshest of lands, love, courage, and compassion could build a future brighter than the most brilliant sunrise. The West, with all its trials, had also given them the greatest gift of all, A family forged in adversity, bound by unbreakable love, and looking forward to the endless promise of tomorrow.